The extreme cold working against the Germans as well as the Russians, but the Russians don't care. They're prepared. They have the right clothing. The supply lines are shorter. They're used to the Russian winter. The German kids are not. Famous speech in 1941 by Adolf Hitler, he begins to start to assess the problem, and he blames what for the ultimate failures of this? It's the winter. The winter killed our guys. They're not used to 32 below, 40 below. Well, I wouldn't be used to that either, especially if I'm fighting in a summer overcoat.
Who wears overcoats in the summer?
Well, summer uniform, light cotton uniform, right? So the Soviets begin their counteroffensive starting in December of 41, and slowly we begin to see a movement back. Now, let's focus on the siege of Leningrad, because Leningrad is highly important. I know we focus a lot on Stalingrad, and we'll get to Stalingrad in just half a second. I don't want Walter to get upset with me. He might want me to go overtime. Average Russian living 600 calories a day, 130,000 people die in 2 months in one city. No heat, no fuel, rations are limited, people start to resort to cannibalism. There are no cats, there's no dogs, anything that could be consumed has been eaten. And the bread, which is the main staple, if you eat too much bread, folks, and you don't eat anything else, what happens to you? Not only stopped up, but you get scurry. You're tough. You're malnourished. There you are. That's a guy. In his hand is the food for the day. That's the bread I'm alluding to. Take a look at him. I think the picture tells you the story. Now, Germans can't break through. The Soviets, this is defined. Heck, these people should have quit, right? What makes them persist? When you have to fight for your life, you do some real odd things, don't you? You'll go when you probably should have quit 12 times over. And this is Leningrad. Same thing with Moscow, the defense lines. Stalwart. They're a lot of times facing far superior forces in terms of technology and such, but they hold their own. So what does Hitler have to do? He's realizing that he can't break through. This is not working. So in August 23, 1942, he's got to throw a Hail Mary pass. This campaign is not working. Let's be honest. Operation Barbarossa, tactical victory, but it really is an overall defeat. So how can I make lemons, take these lemons and make lemonade out of them? Well, let's go towards the oil. If we divert everything we have, we push down towards the south, Army Group South, we can go through through the Caucasus and get the oil. Now, there was also a thought that they'd launch a secondary operation going through Turkey and Iran to capture the oil that way. So they get the oil fields in the Caucasus, and they would also get the oil fields in Iran at that time. But they wanted to see how it would work first to the north. He launches this all-out attack, shifting almost all of his resources that he can afford to this area. And what happens? Initially, they start moving, and they're making inroads. By August 23rd, they're attacking Stalingrad. In fact, they leveled Stalingrad. If you really look at pictures, there's nothing left in Stalingrad. It's just like dust. But the problem is the Russians having what? Given up. You had a question?
Well, I'd just like to point out, yeah, you're right. In the opening stages, they basically flattened it with a massive air bombardment. The trouble is, basically blocked all the streets.
Yeah, and you couldn't get the tanks in.
24 hours. I mean, with all the streets blocked, with no enemy resistance, you really have a hard time doing that anyway.
Yeah. And now you have to fight house to house, building to building. And how does this work? It is hard, as we found out in some of the places where we fought in the Middle East, going house to house. That's the least preferable way to fight. And that's going to be a problem for them. By November 19th, what happens? The Soviets begin counterattacking, the front begins to deteriorate, and the 6th Army starts to feel like it is trapped, or going to be trapped behind the lines. Paulus, General Paulus, keeps calling the Fuhrer. Keeps trying to let the high command know, we don't have supplies, we're being cut off, we need to go. Plus the fact that winter is already hit. His troops are not prepared. They're open, they're exposed. Stalingrad isn't a great place to be anyway. And they're dying by the numbers. Morale has gone to heck. The effective fighting force is decimated. Hitler refuses to relent. He won't let Paulus go. January of 43, Paulus is on his last legs. He's thinking about surrendering. His battalion headquarters, his army headquarters has been ravaged by the Soviets. He thinks about giving it up. What does the Fuhrer do? He promotes him to a field marshal because he thinks that a field marshal has never, ever surrendered. Well, Paulus fools him. He quits. He surrenders. And the Fuhrer is livid. Keegan talks about how livid he is in the book. He says, watch, he says to the rest of his general staff, the guy will sing like a canary for the Soviets. And he did. He even made propaganda speeches. Now, what changed the tide? Why did the Russians win, or start to win? First of all, the introduction of the T-34 tank. Panzers were having a heck of a time knocking this new tank out. A huge monster tank, thick armor. The German guns are not able to knock them out. They have to have a lucky shot. The lucky shot is they hit them from the rear, right over the engine compartment. How many tanks can you shoot from the rear? Not many. That's called the magic miracle shot. Okay? The other thing we begin to see is the short supply lines of the Russians are going to make the difference. The Germans can't get supplies, Russians can get supplies. You get fed, you get clothes, you get munitions, you're a happy trooper. You don't get any clothes, you don't get any food, you can't shower, you can't find shelter, you're unhappy. And you're probably starving to death, and that's what's going to happen.
The United States supplies for Russians with 70 ships a day at moments.
That's well. By this point in the war, we've got Lend-Lease going 24/7 because we're involved.
Plenty of it.
Yeah, exactly, and that's where we end.
Hey, George?
Yes.
Wasn't it too that, like, since the Germans didn't really take, they just surrounded Leningrad, they had time to evacuate all the factories further east?
Yes. They kept, and that's one of the things that Keegan does a good job, and all the other authors. The Soviets keep moving their places further and further to the east to protect their equipment. Remember, Soviet Union, it's an immense country. And probably at the best, only 30% of it's under what? German conflict. Other questions? Walter, you had 100.
What do you think Stalin's motivation was in not letting hardly any German prisoners go back home? Most of them died.
Well, you got to remember, this is tit for tat. The Germans have made their stand. They're not going to give any quarter. And what happens when the Russians start taking German troops? Did they give any quarter? No. So I don't know. Why are people so brutal to other people?
Well, the Russians took German prisoners and sent them to Siberia. You know that.
Well, the Germans sent them to concentration camps and didn't feed them. So, you know, if you're cold and unfed, or you're hungry and unfed.
He fought in Stalingrad, and he was a communist. He thought he was going to be the mayor of town when the Russians come. For them, he was just a German soldier. He ended up in a lead mine in Siberia. That's where he died.
Yeah. Well, that was part of it. They either worked you to death as a prisoner or whatever. Yes?
Yeah, in Stalingrad, the 6th Army had started out with around 270,000 men. By the time that Powell surrendered...
60. Is it 60 or less than 60?
270,000 to start.
Yeah, but by the end, it's down to what?
91,000 surrendered. And
Right.
out of those 91,000, only 5,000
Made it home.
made it home.
Yeah, exactly.
Not nice there.
No, nobody's nice. Remember, war brings the worst out in people. Just because you surrender doesn't mean you're going to get a pass. That's more of a 21st century idea.
If you don't have the other microphone going, could you repeat the question for them?
The question was, what was the question? Anyway? Yeah, go ahead. Restate your question.
I said that
Well, really, it was a
the 6th
statement.
Army, when it moved into Stalingrad, it had 270,000 men. It was the largest
Right,
formation of its type in the German army.
right.
But by the time it surrendered, around, I think it was at the very beginning of February, it was divided. I didn't know that, but anyway, it surrendered in very early February. It had 91,000 people left in it. Surrendered.
Okay.
Out of those 91,000, 5,000 lived to see Germany.
Yeah, exactly. So what it is really a statement. He said that 276,000 started. By the time the Germans surrendered, there was 91,000. At the end of the war, 5,000 returned. Okay?
Okay, I see lots of eager feet ready to move on the move here. A couple things before we depart. First of all, do not forget these memberships. I've been a very proud member of this museum for the last year. It's really just a treasure here in our community. So please take a look at this. Before we go, I'd like to ask Mr. Malawi to come up and talk about his exhibit again, please. We all got a nice little handout with that, and please share with us.
Okay, I don't need to say much because it's all right here in this paper I gave you. These women, I've only been able to find them one at a time over long periods of time. There were lots of women. There were lots of them who served from Muskegon, but of course they got married, their name changed, and how often have you seen a woman walking around with a World War II veteran cap? No. They disappeared. They might be sitting next to you in church, and there is no possible way I can find them unless you tell me about your aunt or your cousin or your mother or your grandmother or your great-grandmother who was in the war. I have no way to find them except that you'll help me. Thank you.
Next week, the day that lives in infamy, will be Pearl Harbor. Thank you guys for coming. Have a safe drive home.